In the opening chapter labeled Unlucky Number 13, Carter Beckett finds himself exhausted after a passionate encounter with Lacey, a blonde bombshell who once graced the cover of Maxim magazine. While Lacey suggests they continue their intimacy, Carter secretly yearns for solitude, even if it means interrupting their heated rendezvous. He values his alone time, a fact that contradicts his public image as a man constantly surrounded by beautiful women. Later, in another scene, Carter's interaction with Olivia, a woman he genuinely likes and desires to earn her trust, demonstrates his vulnerability and his struggle to express his feelings. Despite initial awkwardness, Carter's earnest attempts to communicate his intentions are interrupted when Olivia proposes they discuss things further the next day, after he cooks her breakfast. The narrative further unfolds with humorous and tense moments, such as when Carter accidentally misnames Lacey as Laura, and when he finds himself unexpectedly helping Olivia out of a dress that has no zipper, leading to an awkward yet intimate moment. Carter's character is portrayed as a complex mix of confidence and insecurity, longing for deeper connections despite his reputation for casual encounters. Another significant event involves Carter's unexpected appearance at Olivia's workplace, where he proudly introduces her as his girlfriend to a group of students. This action not only surprises Olivia but also reveals his growing affection for her, as he supports her publicly and even offers to assist in her class. The novel explores themes of love, self-discovery, and the challenges of navigating relationships in the public eye. Through Carter's journey, readers witness his transformation from a man primarily seeking physical pleasure to one who craves emotional intimacy, and is willing to fight for it, even if it means facing his own fears and insecurities. In a climactic moment, Carter and Olivia share their first kiss, a deeply passionate and transformative experience for both, shattering any pretenses and revealing the intense chemistry between them. This marks a turning point in their relationship, where they both acknowledge the depth of their feelings. The story is punctuated with humorous exchanges, such as Carter's banter with friends and the playful teasing between him and Olivia, as well as heartfelt moments that reveal the character's vulnerabilities and desires. Ultimately, the novel encapsulates the complexities of modern love, where two individuals from vastly different worlds collide, challenging each other to be better versions of themselves. Chapter 2. Early the next morning, a willowy Psy female walked into a breakfast and dinner, no lunch, restaurant just south of San Diego, and sat down, placing her briefcase beside her. She was dressed in a dark gray suit, with a jacket that cinched at the waist, and tailored pants in the same material. Her shirt collar was crisp and white, her nails manicured so they were short and clean. The waitress smiled but didn't expect a response. All Psy, well, except the ones who had defected recently, were emotionless robots. She'd heard rumors that they weren't born that way, that they trained the emotion out of themselves. Damn fool thing if you asked her. What was life without love, without laughter? Yeah, there were a few tears along the way, but hey, that was life. To be lived. But she said none of what was on her mind. Psy were emotionless, but they tipped exactly on the correct percentage, which was better than some cheapskates who ran her off her feet then left a quarter behind. She'd serve a Psy ahead of them any day. What'll it be? She asked, holding up the old-fashioned order pad. That was how this place stayed in business. Folks came for the ambience, as the boss called it. She laughed at him. The old flirt was her husband. She had to keep him on his toes, but he was right. People liked the checkered tablecloths over wooden tables, the real people service as opposed to order pads built into tables, even the crackling old jukebox they cranked up at night. That's why they got a lot of human and changeling traffic. The few Psy who came in were mostly strays on their way to a meeting in the city. This one looked the type. Pretty too, with those bright green eyes against skin that was a nice pale bronze. Psy really were striking a lot of the time. Probably mess with their genes in the womb, the waitress thought. Honey? She prompted when the woman didn't respond. The Psy female blinked, staring at her. And the waitress could have sworn she saw desperation in those eyes. Then the briefcase exploded. Chapter 3. Riley woke to find his brother, Andrew, sitting at the foot of his bed, mug of coffee in hand and a shit-eating grin on his face. Nice trick, bro, he said. Showering before you went to bed. Probably dunked yourself in a stream before you came home, too. Riley just waited. Drew was really good at getting people to spill their guts with sly hints that he knew everything anyway. He blamed it on being the middle child. Riley blamed it on him being a smartass. But you forgot to empty the laundry hamper. Sniffing the laundry now? He raised an eyebrow, knowing Drew had nothing. His clothes had been destroyed. He'd come home in wolf form. And he had dunked his ass in a freezing lake before he returned. You really need to get laid. Oh, we're not talking about my sex life. Another smug smile. Yours is much more interesting. Riley remained on his back, feeling a soft ache in his shoulder. Why are you here? You're supposed to be in Los Angeles this week. Drew had recently been promoted to a role that necessitated him roving around all the different cities under Snowdancer control and reporting back directly to the Snowdancer Alpha, Hawk. It was a needed responsibility, because as Snowdancer had learned in the snow-white chill of the previous winter, not every wolf was good, not every wolf protected. The lesson had struck the pack deep in the heart, and they were still bleeding from it. But that pain hadn't stopped them from fixing it, so it couldn't happen again. Hence, Andrew's new position as Hawk's eyes and ears among those who might otherwise be overlooked. He led a small team of men and women who were known to be absolutely loyal to Snowdancer, people who would cut out their hearts rather than harm the innocent. They were all also quick to smile, easily made friends. Drew, in particular, could get anyone to talk to him about anything, which was why Riley had learned to be very wary of his younger brother's apparently guileless questions. I swapped with Kieran, Drew now said. He wanted to avoid somebody in the den. Riley knew precisely who the other soldier wanted to avoid. He broke up with his latest girlfriend. The fact that Kieran was technically human, having been adopted into Snowdancer as a child, didn't seem to stop him from acting the part of a wolf on the prowl. Woman's out for blood, from what I hear. I figured. The glint returned to his eye. So who was she? I thought you knew? Drew scowled. I know you got laid. It's only a matter of time before I sniff out the truth. Knock yourself out. He began to get up, then realized why his shoulder ached. Mercy had scratched him hard. It might have given a human male pause. It made Riley's wolf smile. Wearing her claw marks was a badge of honor, because it meant he'd driven her to such pleasure that she'd forgotten herself. If she'd been his lover in truth, he'd be showing them off. But he didn't know what she was to him, except the woman who made him hotter and angrier faster than any other. So he remained on his back, brutally aware that once would never be enough. Not even close. His gut tightened. Go away, Drew. I'll get up in a little while. He wants me to leave. Why? Drew sipped his coffee. Could it be because the little she-cat marked our esteemed lieutenant? Riley barely kept himself from reacting to the she-cat comment. He had no intention of hiding his entanglement with Mercy. She might be frustrating as hell, a royal pain in his ass, but she was also an incredibly strong, sexy woman, someone any male would be proud to call his lover. But he needed time to figure out how he was going to deal with it. The instant that thought formed, he heard Mercy's voice in his head, a fragment of memory from their many scuffles. Jesus, Riley, do you ever just react? When necessary. When necessary. She mimicked his voice perfectly. I'd call you Sigh, but I think that would be an insult to the Sigh. I feel. But your feelings go through about 10 different filters before you let them out. She flipped her hair, tied in a high tail, over a shoulder. Doesn't bother me. Except when you drive me insane with these plans. The word plan was about 7 syllables long. We'll deal with some situations as they arise. We don't need a color-coded flowchart. He hadn't had a flowchart, of course. Mercy simply liked to jerk his chain as far as possible. I think you need to go see Brenna, he said to Andrew when his brother remained seated. Word is, she and Judd had a fight. Riley liked Judd, but the man was mated to his baby sister. Riley reserved the right to hassle him periodically, and use him as fodder to distract Drew. She won't talk to me. Go make sure he didn't push her around. Drew left so fast he created a breeze in his wake. Riley wondered if Judd would punch Drew for his unwanted, and entirely unnecessary, interference. Serves him right, he muttered, rising and stealing the coffee his brother had left behind. Judd would cut off his arm before hurting Brenna. That was why he was still alive. Because while Riley wasn't Mercy, with her breathtakingly vivid nature, he felt deeply. And he loved his sister with a strength that made her call him an overprotective bear on a regular basis. He didn't care. The pack had helped so much, but it was Riley Brenna had looked to after their parents' deaths. Riley who'd kissed her scrapes and soothed her nightmares. The fact that she was mated didn't change his right to look after her. A knot of guilt and fury twisted around his heart on the heels of that thought. He hadn't dreamed last night, but the ache was there as always. Because the truth was, he'd failed Brenna when she needed him most. That Psy bastard Santano Enrique had hurt his sister, hurt her so much that she'd almost broken. But she didn't break. She fucking survived, and the last thing she needs now is an idiot brother who feels sorry for himself. Mercy's voice again, words she'd thrown at him when he'd snarled at her one time too many after Brenna's rescue. What would she say if she could hear his thoughts right now? He reached back to touch his shoulder. a reluctant smile tugging at his lips as old rage retreated under a wave of the most primal desire. If he'd known it would be this good between them, he'd have said to hell with self-control and gone after her months ago. That, he thought as he walked into the bathroom, was one mistake he wouldn't be repeating. By the time Drew dragged his sorry ass back through the door, Riley was dressed and eating scrambled eggs. No visible bruises, he said, eyes going to Drew's chest. His brother had been shot through the heart last winter, his blood a scarlet flower across the snow. Riley's wolf couldn't help the near-automatic check. Either Judd was in a good mood, or your ribs must hurt like hell. Laugh if you will, Drew said, an evil grin cracking his face. But now Brenna knows something's up too. Great. If Drew was nosy, then Bren was relentless. You have no life, Drew. Then you won't mind if I stick my nose into yours. Mercy lay in bed way past her usual wake-up time, staring at the ceiling of her cabin. She was sore as heck, marked up with bites, scratches, and bruises, and she felt like purring. Not that she'd tell him ever, but Riley knew what he was doing in bed, or on the forest floor. The wolf had not only ridden her into damn near unconsciousness, he'd given her the best orgasms of her life. And that was plain embarrassing. Her best sex had been with a wolf. Pathetic. Except her body was telling her to shut up and wallow. 'Cause this felt good. Good enough that she might even want to repeat it. No, she told herself the instant the thought reared its head. Once, and most of the night definitely counts as once, you can write off as a mistake. But you do this again and he's going to start thinking he has rights over you. She knew predatory changeling men. They liked control. They particularly liked their women to submit. And Riley was one big giant hunk of testosterone-fueled Neanderthal wolf. He probably thought her submission was his right. She snorted. Not in this lifetime. Groaning as her muscles protested, she turned. She'd had a shower last night, but a hot bath was unquestionably in order. And a massage. One of her packmates would be happy to give her the latter out of simple friendship, but if they did, they'd see the marks on her body. She could imagine their reaction when they found out she'd been getting down and dirty with a wolf. The snowdancers were their allies, but Leopard and Wolf didn't easily mix. True friendship would take one heck of a long time. And though she'd had great sex with Riley, okay, hot monkey freaking wonderful sex, he wasn't her friend either. Most of the time he irritated the hell out of her just by breathing. She jumped as the comm panel beeped. It was an effort to stretch out a hand from the warm cocoon of her bed and pick up the portable handset. Yeah. Turn on the visual, Mercy. All laziness fled. Gran. Of course it's me. Now the visual. Hurry up, girl. Your grandfather's waiting so we can squeeze in some horizontal tango time before a meeting. Mercy blushed. I so didn't need that image in my head. And no visual, I'm naked. What she was worried that her eagle-eyed grandmother would spot the bite mark Riley had left on her neck. You haven't got anything I haven't, her grandmother said. Gran. She smiled despite herself. I'm not one of your pack, so don't act the alpha with me. Her maternal grandmother led the Azure Sun pack down in Brazil. Isabella's sentinels had stood by her as she aged, because it wasn't always about strength with changelings. Age and experience counted just as much. Not that her grandmother wasn't also in phenomenally good shape. I don't act the alpha, Mercy girl. I am alpha. It was said with the calm confidence of a woman who knew exactly who she was and didn't give a damn what anyone else thought. And this alpha has a present for you. Every single cell in Mercy's body went on high alert. Gran? What did you do? Don't sound so worried, darling. I know you said you couldn't leave your pack to come see if one of my sentinels might work as a mate, but we're pretty calm down here, so I'm sending Eduardo and Joaquin up to you. Oh, dear God. Gran, you don't need to play matchmaker. I already found someone to have wild sex with, but she didn't think her grandmother needed to hear that part. Really? A sharp sound. Less dominant? Say my name, kitty. Her claws sliced out, threatening to destroy the sheets. No. Is he your mate? The leopard snarled at the idea. We've only just. Then there's no harm in having a wider field to choose from. Mercy was all but strangling the handset. Gran, I seriously don't need any help. Don't send your sentinels up here. Dodging two undoubtedly determined males was not her idea of a good time. Especially not when the only man her body seemed to crave was a wolf she'd threatened to kill more than once. Too late, Isabella said. I cleared it with Lucas days ago. My men are probably already in your territory. And if they don't work out, I have several other unmated sentinels who all think you'd make an excellent mate. Mercy thumped her forehead with a fist. I'm sending them straight back. I don't need the complication. Of course you do, dear. And if the man you're seeing can't handle a little competition, he should get out of the game. Her voice changed, became pure alpha. You need a tough man, Mercy. Otherwise, you'll stomp on his heart and eat it for breakfast. Thanks. Fact of life, kitten. A muffled whisper. Speaking of tough men, your grandfather is out of patience. I'll talk to you after you meet Eduardo and Joaquin. She was about to put the handset on the bedstand when it came back to life in her hand. This time she checked the caller ID. Lucas? What's up? I need you to run a checkout by the Grove. Something's there that shouldn't be. Her mind shifted into sentinel mode. Like last time. Then it had been a wounded psi defector they'd found. The aftermath had almost gotten both Dorian and Ashaya killed. No, Lucas's voice was grim. Tip was there's a dead smell in the air. Chapter 4. Ice water in her veins. Psi human or changeling? No confirmation, call me the second you know, he said. One of the snowdancers is already on the way to join you. Why? Her leopard bristled. The Grove's in our territory. It was one of their juveniles who sensed something off when he passed through. Huh, Mercy said. He probably came down to do mischief. As Dark River's official liaison to Snowdancer, there wasn't much she didn't know about the little turf war the cat and wolf juveniles and young adults were having. Anything that involved both packs and didn't need an alpha's attention went through her. And Riley. The bite mark on her neck tingled in sensory memory. She could all but feel his lips, his teeth against her sensitized flesh. Anything serious I need to worry about? Snapping back to the present, she shook her head. No, they're just blowing off steam, trying to figure out the hierarchy between themselves. Both Dark River and Snowdancer ran disciplined packs. The younger members knew exactly how far they could go. Maybe I can beat the Snowdancer to the Grove. We're allies. Lucas sounded very patient. Be nice. She knew he traded barbs with Hawk, the Snowdancer alpha, every time they met. I will if you will. Shut up. I'm your alpha. Go look and see what's up. Hanging up with a grin that quickly faded as she considered what she might find, she hurried to throw some water on her face. The bath would have to wait until she had a few hours to relax. Though her muscles were still a little sore, it was nothing that would hold her back. She was a sentinel for a reason. She was fit, lethal, and well able to take down most men twice her size. Not including Riley. Her teeth bared at the way he'd pinned her. Maybe she'd enjoyed it last night. But if the wolf tried to use that to change the balance of power in the sentinel-lieutenant relationship between them, things would get seriously ugly. Her mind filled with images of him blocking her punches, trying not to hurt her. She squelched the tiny tendril of warmth that threatened to rise to the surface. Because if there was one thing she knew about predatory changeling men, it was that they weren't good with boundaries. If she gave an inch, he'd take a whole country mile, start trying to protect her in the field. Scowling at the thought, she wiped off her face, took a second to cover up a certain mark, then scraped her hair back into a high, tight ponytail before dressing in jeans, a plain white tee and boots. Her cell phone was on the night table and she grabbed it on the way out, sticking it in her back pocket. The autumn air tasted crisp, sweet, almost too cold. She drew it into her lungs as she ran, ceding control to the leopard though she remained in human form. It knew instinctively where to put its feet, when to duck, when to switch direction because an easier path lay a little bit to the left or right. Just felt like being. Despite the bleak nature of what lay ahead, she was smiling when the first hint of scent hit her nose. Her stride faltered as she crossed into the large tract of land known as the Grove. God would not be that cruel. But he was. Because there was Riley, running to meet her from the opposite direction. His expression was the by now familiar impassive one, the one that made her want to needle him simply to get a reaction. If she hadn't seen that same face violent with passion, she'd have thought him an android. And for a predatory male changeling, especially one as dominant as Riley, that was some act to pull off. Coincidence? She asked with saccharine sweetness. His eyes, dark, intense, extraordinarily focused, went to her neck. You can't heal a bite that fast. Cool words, but his jaw was a brutally hard line. Maybe I can. And maybe she had really good concealer. Let's do this. She swept left as he went right. Anything? She asked as they met on the other side of the rough circle. No. Another sweep. She growled at him. I know what I'm doing. Don't give me orders. Those oh-so-calm eyes didn't so much as narrow. Fine. And he was gone. That pissed her off. Which, she realized, was precisely the result he'd intended. Riley knew exactly how to push her buttons. Like he took a damn degree in antagonizing. She froze, sniffed the air, and picked up a scent that tied her stomach in knots. Damn. Putting 2 fingers to her mouth, she whistled. Riley arrived a minute later. Some kind of cat, he said the instant he got close. Changeling lynx. Crouching to confirm the scent, she shook her head and caught a vague whiff of the dead smell that had freaked out the juvenile. Her soul chilled, even as the leopard whispered that that scent had never belonged to a person. She's here because there's a wild lynx population in the area. Riley's shoulders locked, his hands fisting. She's gone rogue. I hope it's not too late. Mercy swallowed and rose to her feet. Rogues were changelings who'd surrendered absolutely to the beast, submerging their human half. If they'd turned into pure animals, it wouldn't have mattered so much. Yes, it would have broken hearts, but the lost ones would have been allowed to live out their lives in peace. But rogues were smarter, faster, quicker. And they liked hunting those they had once called family. But this one? It's a kid, Riley. The wolf looked at her out of Riley's eyes. You know her. Willow's family had to get the okay to be in our territory. Predatory changelings had very strict rules. Kept the peace. And the most basic rule was no going into another predator's territory without permission. Her parents work for a company that relocated to Tahoe. How old is Willow? 8, I think. She drew in a deep breath, attempting to locate the source of the fading spray of blood and death. Something has to have happened to her parents. She pulled out her cell and coded in a call to Lucas as they started following Willow's trail. Mercy, you found. It's Willow, she told him. You need to get someone to check out the Baker house. Lucas swore under his breath. Nathan drove out that way early this morning. I'll get him to go in. She hung up as Riley motioned he was going left. Nodding, she went leopard quiet as she circled right, sensing Willow was close. But it wasn't the girl she found. It was the body of what had been a small wild dog. Small but muscled. She's very close to the point of no return if she did this. Thank God it was a true animal, not a changeling. If the girl had killed a person, there was no coming back from that. Riley crouched down beside her. Girl didn't eat the flesh. This was pure rage. Poor baby. Her heart clenched. What could have driven a little girl to this? She can't be far. The scent's too strong. Making a quick decision, Mercy began to pull off her boots. I'll have an easier time with her if I shift. Riley nodded. I'll stay downwind. Good idea. A wolf would either terrify or antagonize the girl in her current state of mind. Turn around. Changelings weren't prudes about nudity, but now that Riley had seen her naked in very intimate circumstances, well, things were different. And that irritated her. I said turn around. He folded his arms and leaned against a tree, those chocolate dark eyes watching her with unblinking focus. Oh yeah, Riley knew just what buttons to push. But she wasn't a cat for nothing. Fine. Shrugging, she ignored him to strip with changeling efficiency, balling up her clothes and shoes to cache in the tree. I'll do that. Riley's voice sounded from behind her. Then he put his hand on her shoulder. Sizzle. The electricity generated by that simple contact continued to rock through her, even as she whacked off his hand. No touching. The cat swiped at her, wanting more, but she gritted her teeth and held on, knowing if she didn't set the ground rules now, Riley would push and push until something snapped. The man did obsession better than several of the leopards she knew. Give me the clothes. His anger was quiet, a gathering storm beneath the smooth surface he showed to the world. Figuring he'd had an unwelcome surprise in her refusal to allow skin privileges, she thrust her things into his hands. Fine, knock yourself out, and shifted. Agony and ecstasy, pure pleasure and excruciating pain, all over in an instant. Riley knelt down, clasping the fur at the back of her neck. You're fucking bruised all down your back. Why the hell didn't you tell me it hurt? Because it didn't at the time, genius. Snapping her teeth at him, she pulled away and headed toward the lynx. She was aware of Riley falling slightly behind as he took care of caching her clothes, and then his scent faded altogether, which reminded her. The girl would hardly appreciate sensing Riley in her fur. She paused to roll around in some fresh leaves, crushing them to overlay his scent with the mingled echoes of the forest. That done, she made her way very, very carefully to the little grove that appeared to be the end of the scent trail. The wild lynx saw her first. They greeted her with soft growls and went about their business when she made no go-away sounds. Willow was sitting in the middle of a group of lynx cubs. Except she was bigger, her eyes different, unique. The way she held herself, the way she smelled, it all marked her as changeling. Walking over, Mercy batted away the other cubs, careful not to do harm. They padded off, though an impish few tried to nip at her legs. One growl and they scattered. Willow didn't move. That alone set her apart. Instead of challenging the girl, Mercy sat down beside her, crowding her against a tree. Willow's little frame was cool against Mercy's side. her heartbeat not as ragged as it should have been. The poor cub was in shock. Mercy just sat there. Let Willow know she was safe, protected by someone bigger and stronger who wouldn't hurt her. It took time, but that shocky little body eventually relaxed a fraction. Then another. She felt the girl snuggle into her and breathed a sigh of relief. If Willow recognized and saw comfort in her, then she wasn't beyond saving. Half an hour later, Mercy decided it was time for the next step. Getting up, she turned and nipped at Willow's ear. The lynx cub made a startled sound and scrambled up on all 4 feet, eyes wide. Holding that wary gaze, Mercy shifted. Willow was still in lynx form when Mercy hunkered back down, her hair cascading over her shoulders. Damn, she'd forgotten to take out the hair tie. Not only that, the concealer was gone. Everything disintegrated during the shift. Even tattoos had to be done with special ink that bonded to their cells in some weird way she didn't particularly want to explore. It was enough that the 2 she bore didn't have to be redone after each shift. Hey baby. She stroked her hand over Willow's head, flattening those adorable tufted ears. The girl butted up against her but resisted shifting. I know you're scared, she said, kneeling so she could pull Willow into her lap. But I'm here now and I won't let anyone hurt you. The girl lay motionless against her heartbeat. Mercy's throat threatened to close at the vulnerability of the child in her arms. Come on, Willow. I need to know who hurt you so I can help. Strokes through baby soft fur. Kisses on a cold little nose. You're safe. She put all her dominance into her voice. It was considerable. She was one of the highest-ranking members of either Dark River or Snow Dancer. For this lynx girl, that made her commands close to impossible to disobey. Shift. And Willow did. Mercy didn't move a muscle as the cub disappeared into the magic of the shift, the sparkles of color bright and joyful. An instant later, a little girl scrambled off her lap, crouching down opposite her. Her eyes were huge with hurt. They took Nash. Your brother. Nash, she knew, was a student at MIT, but he had visiting privileges to Dark River Land. A swift nod. They came and they hurt Mommy and Daddy and they took him. Willow swallowed hard, and it was clear she was trying desperately not to cry. My Mommy and Daddy wouldn't wake up. Oh hell. Willow, sweetheart. She stroked a hand over the girl's ash blonde hair. Careful with touch now. Changelings were funny about some things. And while the cub may have had no problem with cuddling, a little girl wouldn't allow total famille eel skin privileges to someone who was almost a stranger. I'm going to call a friend now. He's a wolf. Willow stared at her, hurt and terror momentarily trumped by astonishment. A wolf? Yeah. She shrugged. I know. But he doesn't bite, lie. So don't worry. Willow didn't look particularly convinced, but she stayed in position as Mercy whistled. Riley appeared within a minute, with her clothes, boots, and phone. Grateful she got dressed. When Riley shrugged off his t-shirt and offered it to Willow, the lynx hesitated. Don't worry, Mercy said, unable to stop staring at the claw marks on his back. Wolf germs wash off real easy. Damn, she'd scratched him hard. It made her cheeks burn to realize how far gone she'd been. Willow took the t-shirt after a few more seconds and pulled it on. Covered pretty much everything. And they might be changeling, but sometimes with strangers they were human too. The girl stood up and met Riley's gaze, showing a courage that made Mercy's cat growl in silent approval. Thank you. You're welcome. He glanced at Mercy, a question in his eyes. She gave a slight nod. You tired, kitten? Willow shook her head. I rested a lot. But she'd run a hell of a long distance from home. Still, the girl was a predatory changeling. Smaller than a leopard, but a predator nonetheless. They had pride in spades. And this one had earned her right to that pride. All right. Give me a sec and we'll be off. She coded in Lucas's number. Mercy, he answered. We have Willow's parents. Alive. How? Tranks. Heavy duty. A pause as if he was discussing something with another person. Couple of pack medics living nearby are giving them the once-over. But they should be on the road soon. Bring the cub to Tammy's. Hanging up, she smiled at Willow. Your mom and dad are okay. A flash of hope followed by distrust. They wouldn't wake up, and they smelled really bad. On occasions like this, a great sense of smell could screw things up. Especially for the little ones. Someone drugged them. It made them very sleepy. Willow bit her lip. This is a waste of time, Riley said. She can see for herself when we get there. Willow nodded like a little machine. Come on then, she said, wondering if the kid realized she just sided with a wolf. Time to run. She went in front, Willow in between, Riley at the back. When the kid began to flag, Riley simply picked her up, swung her onto his back and kept running. Willow held on tight. The leopard and Mercy growled in approval, whatever his faults, and they were many in legend. Riley knew how to take care of the Chapter 5. In the Cynet there was a ripple of reaction to the. What had it been? A bombing? An accident? Whatever it was, it made news uploads across the country. People asked for more information, and those closest to the restaurant tuned into the local stations, hoping to supply it. The public data was sparse as enforcement and rescue had reacted within minutes. However, a human student had managed to grab some camera phone footage. It was obvious the Psy female had been at the epicenter. There was a flurry of speculation, not unpredictable, especially after Ashaya Line's violent defection from the net, but the ripple eventually calmed. It was an isolated episode, people said, most likely an accident caused by chemicals in the woman's briefcase. She'd been a research scientist. From the evidence, it appeared she'd made an error of judgment and put two volatile substances together. There was no cause to consider it anything else. Chapter 6. Mercy led Riley and Willow to her vehicle, parked a little way from the cabin. Buckle up, she said, starting the engine. Done. Bright eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. See. Even as Mercy nodded, she glimpsed Riley twist around to look over his shoulder. Good girl. That light exchange set the tone for the drive to Tammy and Nate's place, but Willow got real quiet the instant they opened the doors and she stepped out. I can't smell my mom and dad. Her hand clenched on Mercy's. They had a longer way to travel, Riley told the girl with a blunt honesty predatory changeling children appreciated. Most of them were very good at sniffing out lies. Probably be here in the next half hour. Go on in and grab something to eat. It was well after the breakfast hour. I'm not hungry. Willow kicked at the grass. Mercy tugged at her hand, making her look up. Your mom let you skip meals? A shake of the head. So. Sigh. I'll go eat. But she dragged her feet all the way to the house. At least until Tammy's twins came running out in human form, jumping up and down at the idea of a big girl to play with. Their new pet, a kitten named Ferocious, ran up on their heels, determined not to be left behind. Taking advantage of Willow's fascination with the gorgeous gray thing, the twins basically kidnapped their new friend with promises of letting her cuddle Ferocious. A kitten for a pair of leopard cubs? Riley murmured. Mercy grinned. That kitten thinks it's the master of the universe. Jules and Rome growl at any other cat that dares swipe at her. Laughing at his expression, she nodded at the house. Let me make sure Willow's okay. When she arrived in the kitchen, it was to find Ferocious purring loudly in the Lynx girl's lap, while Julian and Roman stood on either side of her, their little hands on her bare arms as they told her all the amazing things their pet could do. Your boys are wonderful, Mercy said to Tammy. They'd understood instinctively that Willow needed caring, so they were doing the job. The healer smiled in maternal pride. Have you eaten? Mercy was shaking her head when Lucas's mate, Sasha, walked into the kitchen. Morning, Mercy. Lucas said to let you know he's out front. Satisfied Willow would be well looked after, and in all probability petted and spoiled, Mercy headed out to find Lucas giving Riley's back a considering glance as the damn wolf turned to retrieve something from the car. Fuck. Lucas, Mercy was well aware, would know for certain that those marks had been made with leopard claws. But he didn't say anything when Riley turned back, cell phone in hand. Must have slipped out of my pocket. I'm going to let Hawk know what's going on. Lucas nodded and moved a little distance toward the house to give Riley privacy. Changeling hearing was incredibly acute, but it was her alpha's eyes that worried Mercy as she followed him over. Any idea what happened? Nate said the house had obviously been invaded. The son is missing, signs of a struggle. Eyes narrowing, he looked her up and down, then drew in a deep breath. Good, you took care of it. She categorically did not want to be having this conversation. Yeah. Can we move on now? No, a glint lit those intelligent green eyes from within. Riley's got some interesting marks on his back, and you're not touch hungry all of a sudden. And is that a bite I see on your neck? What's one got to do with the other? She tried to brazen it out, but couldn't stop herself from sweeping her hair around to hide the incriminating mark. Of course Riley had to bite her somewhere obvious. It was exactly the sort of thing dominant males love to do, the first stage in claiming a female for their own. Lucas's lips curved, the savage markings on his face, for jagged lines like the claw marks of some great beast, standing out in stark relief. Dorian's going to love this. She glared. I swear to God you tell him and I'll... What the hell could you threaten an alpha with? I'll tell Hawk you want to go on daily bonding runs with him. Lucas didn't stop grinning but said, That's just mean, Mercy. He glanced over her shoulder. But if you don't want anyone else to know, get Riley a t-shirt. This is not an admission of anything. she said as she ran into the house and grabbed a spare tea from the stash the sentinels kept there. It made sense since Tammy was their healer, and they often came to her bleeding or worse. The tea was a plain gray, but when she threw it at Riley and he put it on, it abruptly became much more interesting. The man might make her hackles rise 99% of the time, but he was built delicious, all hard muscle and contained masculine power. Feeling heat bloom in the pit of her stomach in spite of her teeth-gritting control, she turned away just in time to catch Lucas's smirk. "Luke, I'm a sphinx," he promised. "By the way, you have visitors. Came in last night, staying in a cabin not far from your place." Anger flared, eclipsing everything else. Why didn't you tell me my grandmother was doing this? She knew Lucas and Isabella had a strong alpha-to-alpha bond. Over 15 years ago, when Dark River had been under attack by the Shadowwalkers, Isabella had offered her help, though she'd been dealing with serious territorial problems of her own at the time. In the end, the help hadn't been needed, but the offer had never been forgotten. Now Lucas folded his arms. "I thought you were drowning. Your grandmother was offering to throw you a life jacket." Blunt words. "And might be one of them turns out to be your mate." He switched his attention as Riley jogged over. "Hawk up to date?" Riley nodded. "Since I'm down here, I'll stay on this. What did Nate find?" Lucas gave him the same rundown he'd given Mercy. "Willow say anything?" "Only that they took Nash," Mercy said, putting everything else out of her mind. "Why would anyone run this big an op to grab a college student?" Brenna was a college student when Enrique took her. The withheld rage in Riley was an almost physical thing. Mercy understood. Santino Enrique, a cardinal telekinetic, had killed Dorian's sister, Kylie, and viciously tortured Riley's sister Brenna. Brenna had survived, but she'd been hurt in ways no woman should have to suffer. "Riley's right," she said, "and the sky didn't fall in. This could be another crazy, or it could be something specific to Nash." Lucas nodded. "Parents should be able to tell us more, but don't count on scent." Someone sprayed a heavy perfume throughout the house. Riley's eyes grew flint hard. Could be Changeling. Mercy hoped that wasn't true. Betrayal among the tight structure of the pack was rare, but when it happened it shoved an ice pick of the cruelest pain through them all. "We need to go back to the scene after we hear what Ian and Enid have to say." She met Lucas's eyes. "I want to stay on this." "Works." Lucas nodded. "Nate's helping Emmett run some important training for Kit and the other novice soldiers. It'd be better if he could continue with that." An instant later, they felt the vibration of a vehicle getting closer. Nate's SUV rolled in not long after. Two people who looked like they'd been dragged through hell itself got out the back as Nate stepped out from the driver's side. Mercy heard the sound of running feet seconds before Willow screamed, "Mommy! Daddy!" and launched herself off the porch. Catching her in a bone-crushing embrace, her father wrapped one arm around his mate and pulled her into the hug as well. Mercy looked away from the private moment, her eyes locking with Riley's. Pure electric heat. She held that wolf gaze, daring him to say something. He kept his silence, but those eyes, the intensity in them made her thighs clench in instinctive female reaction. She called him a stick in the mud because he was so damn calm, so practical, and in no way hot-headed. But as she'd learned last night, when that intensity focused on a woman, it focused. Hunger tore through her, potent, rough, primal in its sensuality. "Can you two keep from tearing each other's throats out during however long it takes to find Nash?" Lucas's dry tone did nothing to hide the feline amusement in his eyes as he broke into her line of sight. "Or maybe I should be worrying about clothes instead?" Riley growled low in his throat. "Not your business." His voice was more wolf than human, heavy with the same need that had Mercy in its claws. "What?" Lucas asked disingenuously as Nathan began to herd the sobbing family inside. "Come on. Playtime's over." Mercy hung back a little as Lucas went in. "Keep your shirt on next time," she muttered to Riley, realizing the implication of her statement an instant too late. "Keep your claws in." "No, don't. I liked it." A pause. "Kitty." She felt those same claws release. It took serious effort of will to put them back in. "What am I worried about?" she said instead, drawing blood in a much more effective way. If Riley wanted to mess with a cat, he'd better invest in armor. "I'm never again going to let myself get that desperate. I mean, a wolf? Do you know how many years it'll take me to live that down?" The words were almost subvocal, designed to carry to his ears alone. She felt him bristle, but all amusement died the instant she saw the way Willow's mom was clutching her. "My baby," she was saying, kissing Willow's cheek. "My baby." Another kiss. Willow clung to her like a little monkey. Her father was sitting beside them, touching his child and his mate anywhere he could reach. The love, the connection between the three was a physical thing. Her chest grew tight with the force of it. Then she felt Riley enter behind her, and the heat of him was a wash of wildfire on her back. "Ian," she said, feeling that fire snake into her very veins. "We need to talk to you. The sooner the better. And Enid too." Sasha came into the room from the kitchen right then. "Willow, why don't you come play with Rome and Jules for a while? They're starting to drive their mother crazy." A smile, but the eyes, the white stars on black velvet of a cardinal, the most powerful grade of Psi, were directed at the Lynx girl's parents. Mercy felt a sense of calm, of warmth, soften the stark edge of fear and desperation in Ian's and Enid's scent. It was no surprise. Sasha was an empath, a woman born with the ability to soothe emotional wounds. Now she'd taken a piece of the baker's pain, absorbing it into herself. Mercy wondered if doing that hurt Sasha, but knew her alpha's mate would never back off, no matter if it did. Ian and Enid finally let Willow go with Sasha 5 minutes later. "She'll be fine," Mercy reassured them, taking a seat in front of the couple while Lucas and Nathan remained standing against the walls. Riley, however, came to sit beside her, swinging around a chair to put his arms on the back. "She's a strong kid," he told them in his direct, no-nonsense way. "Escaped and hid out with a group of wild lynx." Ian smiled, his pride open. "We thought they'd taken her too." "Did you see who came into your home?" Mercy asked, trying to ignore the fact that Riley's thigh was pressing against hers, the rough masculine heat burning through her jeans to incite her leopard to voracious sexual want. It was on purpose. Definitely on purpose. The wolf was getting back at her for implying he'd been nothing but a convenience. Even a hint would help. The bakers shook their heads. "We were asleep," Enid said, voice husky from crying. "But usually, we'd wake up the instant an intruder even entered the yard. But this time, it was like we were drugged right from the start." "Enid's right." Ian frowned. "I remember fighting to wake up. Sure something was wrong, but I couldn't. I saw a black shadow bend over me, felt a push in my..." He shoved up his sleeve as if searching for something. "I felt it right here." He pressed a spot on his forearm, like a pressure injector. "Next thing I know, I'm waking up and the house smells wrong, and I know the children are gone." "Could have been some kind of gas," Nate suggested. "We'll have to check to see how they got it into the house." Enid sat up, eyes distraught. "We had some work done under the house a few days ago. I was being paranoid, wanting to make sure everything was solid because Willow's always crawling under there. But they could have set something up then. If I hadn't." "Shua." Ian buzzed the top of her head. "The only ones at fault are the bastards who did this." Mercy wished she could give the bakers more time to come to terms with everything that had happened, but finding Nash had to be the priority. If it was a gas, how did Willow escape? Enid laughed, a choked-up sound. "She's been misbehaving lately. Sneaking out to go play in the woods at night. Drives me crazy. Probably saved her life." She clapped a hand over her mouth. "I didn't mean to say that. Nash is fine. He has to be fine." "I'm sure he is." Ian's tone was so certain, everyone looked at him. "It's his work," he told them. "Somebody wanted him for his skills. My son's mind, it's brilliant." Mercy's cat came to attention, seeing a parallel that might simply be an illusion. "But if it wasn't? I thought he was a student." "Not an ordinary one. He started taking college classes at 13. Ian's pride was apparent even through his worry. "He's been working on his own projects for years now. All to do with nanotech," Enid said, and a bell rang loud and clear in Mercy's head. Beside her, Riley's thigh turned rock hard, and she knew their thoughts were running on identical tracks. 3 months back, Dorian's mate had been the subject of a kidnapping attempt by the Human Alliance. Though none of Ashiya's attackers had survived to confirm it, it had been clear they'd wanted her for her knowledge of a lethal virus. Depending on the nature of Nash's work, this seemed very much like the kind of operation the Alliance would run. "Do you have details of your son's research?" Mercy asked, knowing the payoff had to be major for the kidnappers to chance reprisal by Dark River, because while in their territory, the bakers were packed. And Dark River never forgot its own. Both Enid and Ian shook their heads. "It's all hush-hush," Ian said. "The university got a grant from some big company, and that company has first rights to the results." "But his professor would know," Enid added. "I'm sure he'd help you." "Merce," Lucas said, "why don't you and Riley head out to the house? I'll organize the data collection on Nash. Enid and Ian can see if Willow remembers anything." The shift of muscle against her own, a slight rasp of fabric against fabric that made every hair on her body stand up in attention. But this time, the wolf hadn't done it on purpose, his attention elsewhere. "We have to guard against tunnel vision," he warned. his fury apparent in the vicious control with which he spoke. Riley, Mercy knew, despised the monsters who preyed on those weaker and less able to defend themselves. It was one of the few things they agreed on. Could be a professional relationship gone bad, a competitor, anything. We need to explore all angles until we have more intel. The others made sounds of agreement, and Mercy and Riley drove off after grabbing a quick meal. Despite Riley's attempt at wresting control, even though it was her car, Mercy was in the driver's seat. It was obvious Riley hated that fact with a pharaoh kind of passion. "If you don't stop clenching your fists," she said sweetly, "your veins might explode." "I'll take that under advisement, Melisande." She barely stopped herself from slamming on the brakes. "Who told you that?" She needed to know who to dismember. He snorted. "I ran the background check on you." "What? Did you think Snowdancer was sitting on its ass while you cats set up your territory here?" Given that she'd done some spying of her own, she couldn't exactly argue with that. "But that name is off limits. On pain of death." "I'm quaking in my boots, pussycat," she screamed. "Why do you live to aggravate me?" "Why?" A smile that told her nothing. "One thing I've always wondered. Why did you enter that bikini contest when you were a teenager?" Her face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "How far back did you trace me?" "Far enough." A pause. "You didn't answer my question. And you didn't turn into a puff of smoke and disappear. The world is full of disappointments." A low growl filled the vehicle. Chapter 7. Counselor Caleb Krychek sifted through the reports flowing in via his constant connection to the Cynet, the vast mental network created by the minds of millions of Psi, and paused. Living jacked into the net without firewalls or shields was not recommended, and such complete immersion, such obscene openness to others, was not something he'd ever practice. But as a counselor, he had to be aware of everything the instant it happened. And given that most Psi uploaded data almost without thought, the net was the quickest and most efficient information highway in the world. Hence his very, very well-guarded link. "Silver," he said, as another report pinged in his mind, alerting him to news that had set off one of his keywords. His most senior aide walked into the room, smart and coolly elegant despite the fact that beyond the windows, Moscow lay swathed in darkness. "Sir, I've caught 3 reports of public violence by Psi in the past 12 hours, he said. And it was the word public that was important, because silence had been meant to wipe out violence among their race. "Find out what's happening." "Yes, sir." She paused, and waited until he'd raised his head from his desk before speaking. "There is a slight possibility that pure Psi might be behind this." Caleb had considered that the pro-silence vigilante group had the potential to spin out of control. And Caleb did not countenance anything outside his control. "Do you have any evidence to back that up?" Because Silver's family were spies, betraying pure Psi without a blink because Caleb was more powerful, and therefore had the potential to offer them a better gain. Loyalty to anyone outside their own family was a cost-benefit calculation for the merchants. "No," Silver said. "However, I'll ask members of my family if they've heard anything. There's also a chance it's a cluster." He didn't ask how she knew about clusters. He hadn't chosen Silver as his aide because she was stupid. Make a list of all recent events that fit the parameters. Go back a month. Clusters of violence, when a ripple in silence broke certain fragile minds, only took place over a limited period of time. 2 weeks was the maximum. If this had been going on any longer, they had to start looking for another explanation. Even as Caleb spoke to Silver, another man, one known only as the information merchant, received a request through an email address available to those who knew where to look. The request was unexpected.it might even, he thought, be impossible to fulfill. But the information merchant was the best in the business. He did not accept failure. Decision made, he tapped out a reply using the wireless keyboard beamed onto his desk. Request received. Transfer $1 million to the account specified below. Work will begin as soon as the transfer has been verified. Further payments will depend on hours of work and, in this case, the level of Chapter 8. The echoes of Riley's growl reverberated inside the vehicle. Satisfied she'd finally gotten to him, Mercy relaxed her hold on the steering wheel and literally shoved her mind into work mode. "So the explore all options stuff aside, what's your gut say on this alliance? Has their trademark, or what we know of it?" He stared out the windshield, his wolf very apparent in the tone of his voice. And this time the edge was lethal. "Planned like clockwork," he continued. "Only mistake was Willow, and even that's not a biggie. She's a cub, was probably too scared to take much in. But if it is the alliance, why would they be so stupid? That she didn't understand. They have to know we'll come down hard. We took out their entire team last time. Riley was silent for a few minutes. What do we know about the alliance? We've had Keeley doing some research, she said, referring to the pack historian. From what she found, it looks like it's a two-faced organization, but that second face, the paramilitary arm, is hidden so deep, most of their own members don't know about it, even though they're effectively funding it. That tracks with our intelligence. We don't know how long the militant arms existed. She overtook a large truck with speed that made Riley's knuckles whiten, and the leopard smirk in unholy glee. But obviously, they're beginning to get more open in their activities. Part of Mercy could understand why the humans were starting to act with such violence. Being considered the weakest race on the planet had to hurt. What I don't get, she murmured, is how the Alliance could sink so low as to attack women and children families. Their business arm has always had a core of integrity. Been around a long time, too. Riley slammed a hand on the dash, as she swung around a Porsche that was already going well over the speed limit. Mercy! The dominance was back, dark and potent and thick in the confines of the car. It was hard to breathe, but she kept her tone sweet, her leopard tightly held. Yes, Riley. I'm driving on the trip back. Nope. It wasn't a request. And I'm not a submissive. She bared her teeth at him, her own power flaring out in a scalding wave. Suck it up. The air filled with aggression. It skated over her body, along her spine, over her throat. And that quickly she wanted him. He knew almost the instant she did. His indrawn breath harsh in a way that was utterly erotically male. An instant later his arousal mirrored hers. We are so not doing this, she said, having to force the words out past the constriction in her throat. Amber eyes glinted at the periphery of her vision. We already did. She felt like she was drowning in the indelible maleness of him. Once. Enough to take the edge off her need to give her back control over her own body. And it's going to remain that way. She pushed the button that lowered all the windows. He took another deep breath, as if savoring the musk of her damp heat, and her hands clenched on the manual steering wheel. If she hadn't been able to sense his own arousal, she'd have thought he was just messing with her. But he very definitely wanted her. The brutal hunger of him was a pulse against her body, powerful and boldly masculine. Stop the car. She made an undignified squeaking sound in the back of her throat. No way in hell. The instant she did that, she knew full well she'd end up on top of Riley, riding him to erotic oblivion. Silence from the passenger seat. The leopard clawed at her, more than ready to sate its hunger. You know I'm right. Is it the fact that I'm a wolf, or the fact that I made you whimper? Controlled words, so damn controlled. Except for the pulse of heat that kept slapping into her body over and over. It's the fact that you aggravate the shit out of me. She set her jaw. I'm not a slave to my hormones. It was a reminder to herself. A bark of laughter from the wolf next to her. Close, so close. His breath, hot, harsh, male, whispered over her ear as he said, I don't know any woman more in command of herself than you. She shot him a narrow-eyed glance. And that gets your panties in a twist, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay, she hadn't expected that answer. Sweat beaded along her spine as her body fought the urge to give in to the sexual flames licking at every inch of her skin. God, but she wanted to crawl into his lap and just taste. Let me guess, she said, thrusting aside the disturbing depth of her response. You dream of a submissive little wolfie at home, barefoot and pregnant? What's wrong with that? You saying your submissive members have no value? Oh, he was annoying her on purpose. I didn't say that. This is about you not being able to handle a woman who's your equal. A very deliberate pause. I don't see one nearby. She was close to breaking the steering wheel. I'm going to ignore you now. To her surprise, he didn't say anything in return. When she glanced over, he had his head turned toward the open window. Strong jaw, stubborn jaw, a touch of dark stubble, lips that she knew full well could turn soft when they wanted, hair that lifted easily in the breeze, but was shorter than that of most changelings. Since when did she find that sexy? Blinking, she stared through the windshield. It was just a weird chemical attraction, she told herself. She'd been too long without sex and, judging from the ferocity with which he'd taken her, so had Riley. They'd scratched each other's itch and that was that. Done. Finito. Over. Protesting way too much, baby girl. It was her mother's voice. For some reason, whenever she got stupid, her mental voice turned into her mother's. Good thing her mom didn't know about Riley. She'd probably have a coronary. Wolf and leopard? Yeah, right. Having somehow survived Mercy's driving, Riley nodded hellos at the Dark River soldiers Nate had pulled to watch the Baker home and asked one of them to check under the house. See if you can spot anything that could have been used to pipe gas into the house. Don't touch it. Just check. The man's eyes flicked to Mercy. She gave him a nod and he headed off. It irritated Riley that the male hadn't immediately followed his order, but the lieutenant in him was impressed. These men didn't yet know that Riley and Mercy were heading this together. If the soldier had obeyed him, it would have betrayed a lack of discipline. Owen, Mercy said to the remaining soldier now, Riley's on this with me. Owen gave a military-perfect nod, but as Mercy turned away, Riley glimpsed disappointment. Why? Then Owen's nostrils flared and he knew. Boy had been hoping to be the one Mercy would choose to break her sexual fast. Inside him, the wolf's lips curled up to display razor-sharp canines, and his next words came from a part of him Mercy alone seemed to awaken. Ready, kitty? He kept his tone low. Private. Her eyes dipped to his crotch. She licked her lips. And he came to raging painful hardness in a second. Why yes, Riley. Let's go inside. She walked off ahead of him, her hips swaying in a way that was all sorts of provocation. The wolf couldn't decide whether to snarl or open its mouth in a savage smile, the smile of a predator that knew it had been bested. Deciding to think on it, he followed her into the house, the noxious smell of the perfume the abductors had sprayed heavy in his nose. It should have drowned out the sweet musk of Mercy's arousal. Of course it didn't. Because Mercy was a she-devil who delighted in irritating him. All right, he allowed reluctantly, perhaps the scent wasn't on purpose, but Christ almighty, did she have to smell so damn good? He wanted to do what he'd done last night. Bury his face in her neck from behind and take a long deep taste. His mind taunted him with the image of her panting and angry below him, wildfire barely contained. To deal with her, to be with her. He'd had to unleash the wolf. He didn't like being out of control. But neither did he plan on letting Mercy ignore the inferno between them. The object of his thoughts met him in the middle of the house, having apparently gone straight through to the back and worked her way forward. You pick up anything? She was all business now. He shook his head, telling himself to get a grip. Teasing was fine, she'd play with him, cat that she was. But if she got even a hint of just how badly he wanted her, she wouldn't let him within touching distance, just on principle. So he'd have to play this cat-and-wolf game until she gave in to the hunger between them. Then he'd gorge on her. Until she was out of his fucking system. Because no way in hell was Riley Kincaid about to be enslaved by a lust that seemed to know no boundaries. Exactly like the woman who inspired that lust. Riley, she snapped. Stop checking out my boobs and pay attention. I've seen them already, he said, reacting in a way he only ever did with this cat. They're nothing to moon over. What they were ripe, succulent, perfect for biting. Her skin was the rich cream of a true redhead, dusted with a luscious hint of gold. It showed every kiss, every bite mark. He could still see the one he'd made last night. It took everything he had not to lean in, place his mouth over that mark and suck. Yeah, same. Her eyes dropped meaningfully before lifting. Now that we've both got that out of our systems, can we get to work? Sarcastic words, but her scent was a stroke against his senses, cutting through the perfume as if it didn't exist. His skin stretched tight over his body. But he was a lieutenant, and little Willow was relying on them to find her brother. You take that side, I'll do this one. With a nod she walked away. He watched her move for a second before heading to do his own part of the job. He was used to working with a strong female. Indigo was his right hand in the pack. But where Indigo was calm and collected, a perfect complement to his practical personality, Mercy was red-hot passion. He never argued with Indigo, not about anything personal. So the fact that Mercy was a powerful, dominant female had nothing to do with why he couldn't be around her for more than 2 minutes without losing the cool that was as much a part of him as his status as Hawk's most senior lieutenant. Something scratched across his senses. Crouching down, he tried to follow the scent hidden in the miasma of fading perfume. It was there, a shiny thread but worn through thin, so very, very thin. There he caught it. Metal. His first thought was of the sigh. A lot of the ones in the sigh net had a metallic edge to their natural scent that repelled changelings. This was similar but too metallic. There was no life to it. And the sigh, for all their coldness, were still sentient, living beings. Following it across the room, he saw something lying on the floor below an end table. Mercy, he said softly, knowing she'd hear him. You got something. She was beside him moments later. There. She crawled lower, her body brushing along his side. The wolf growled. And it wasn't in rejection. Then she whistled. I've seen one of those before. It's the same as that chip thing the Alliance soldiers had in the backs of their necks when they tried to kidnap Ashaya. I figured as much. I haven't seen one, but Bren described it to me. His sister was a highly qualified tech, part of the team working with Ashaya line to figure out the chips. This one he saw was still attached to a bloody hunk of flesh. Ripped out. Nash. I'm guessing. She paused. I know when my brothers used to sneak out when we were young, I always knew before my parents. Oldest sibling intuition. Maybe Nash was outside tracking Willow when they gassed the place. He had seen Mercy's brothers around but now wondered what they were like. Red-headed hellions probably. Makes sense. He steps out, escapes the gassing, comes back in because he hears something, and that's when they attempt to grab him, not realizing there's another kid out in the woods. Nodding, Mercy touched the floor and came away with a thin layer of dust. He shifted. This is from his clothes disintegrating. Riley sniffed at the finger she held up. I can scent denim. You can. She raised it to her own nose. I can't. He couldn't help it. She brought out the wolf's most wicked edge. That's because I'm older and stronger. She shot him an evil look. As I was saying, Nash shifted. Most likely after he ripped that chip off. Could have done it in animal form too. Lynx are small and agile, especially when they're pissed. He barely resisted the urge to stroke his hand down the sweep of her back and over her bottom. Mercy was beautifully built, all smooth curves and muscled grace. What would it be like, he wondered, to have the right to caress her as he pleased? The wolf was oddly intrigued by the idea. She sat back up on her haunches. But they still got him. Had to be more than one. The Alliance's modus operandi seems to be to over-prepare rather than under. We've got enough flesh to get DNA if the attacker's in any database. There was no question of going to enforcement. This was changeling territory, changeling victims, therefore changeling law applied. Not only that, but enforcement had so many stooges, nothing ever stayed secret. Until they knew what was happening, they couldn't afford to tip off the council. Having lost two highly trained scientific minds when Ashaya and her twin, Amara, defected, chances were the counselors would try to commandeer the Alliance chip and Nash both. As for the assailants, too fucking bad. Don't move the chip. There might be trace around it. Really? Doing an atrocious vocal impersonation of a Southern belle, Mercy fluttered her eyelashes. Why, I'm so glad you're here to tell me, Mr. Kincaid. I might not have figured that out all by my lonesome. He felt his lips twitch. I think you have something in your eye. He was certain he saw a flash of amusement, but then she shook her head and her voice shifted to work mode. Any hint of play buried deep. The text should do the whole house in case they left any other calling cards. Might as well call Ashaya too, have her come out with her team. As Mercy spoke to the MSI who'd mated with Dorian, Riley shifted closer, smiling inwardly at her slight responsive jerk, and bent to look at the chip. It wasn't tiny, maybe 1 square centimeter. But even without a microscope, he could see that it was a complex piece of work. Some kind of neuroinhibitor was the current theory. But what exactly did it inhibit? She's on her way, Mercy said, folding up the phone and surprisingly, not pulling away. Instead she pressed closer, their heads side by side. It's a hell of a piece of work. Her hair brushed his arm, and he remembered how the strands had felt sliding over his skin as she kissed her way down his body that last time. Yeah. His voice was half growl, the wolf's frustration rising to the surface. Let's leave this for Ashaya and do a sweep around the house. They might have left a trail at their entry point. Nate had the men take turns doing that already. Nothing. None of them is a lieutenant or a sentinel. A slanted glance. Is that a compliment? No, it's a fact. He watched her rise to her feet in a fluid move that was intrinsically feline. I'm going to give Jed a call. He's got contacts in the net, can get a feel for whether this was a psi thing. Mercy nodded. I'll utilize our own contacts too. But my gut says the psi aren't involved, at least not directly. Her eyes met his, the leopard apparent in the sheen of gold that overlaid her gaze for a fleeting instant. Time to move, Wolf. Adrenaline speared through his veins as he realized she was beginning to lose the battle to rein in her own hunger. Lead the way, Cat. Chapter 9. Mercy finished the first pass around the Baker home and shook her head. Nothing. Nada. Zip. The scent trail had had hours to dissipate. Riley silently indicated the next pass and off they went, having decided to do this in animal form. As she left, Mercy wondered what anyone would think if they saw a leopard standing face to face with a heavily muscled wolf. Changeling animals were usually bigger than wild animals, but the shift did strange things to body mass and size. It was never a zero-sum equation. Though she was on the tall side of average in human form, she was smack in the middle in leopard form. Riley, however, was big. And unlike most of his brethren, he wasn't built graceful. No, he was built for stubborn endurance. Apparently, his nickname was the Wall. No one, she thought, would ever mistake him for anything but a changeling. Something crunched under her paw. Backing up, she brushed aside the leaves with gentle care. It was nothing. An old toy. Probably willows from the proximity to the house. They didn't find anything in the third or fourth pass. The fifth had to be the final. They were going into more heavily populated areas. It was on that last pass, as they were heading toward each other, that Mercy saw it. A glint of silver in the grass beside a curb on a dead-end street. One that backed onto the woods that separated the Baker home from this neat subdivision. Slowing her pace, she came to a standstill by it. With other houses so close, it could have been any of 1,000 things. But she looked closer. A chain. No, an identity bracelet, the silver bar marked with the name Bowen. She couldn't pick it up with her teeth. She tried a claw very, very carefully. It came. Riley bent his dark gray head and took it in his teeth, holding it as they walked around the area where they'd found it. Nothing else jumped out. Nodding at each other, they ran back and shifted in the patch of woods where they'd left their clothes. Mercy took the bracelet the instant she was human, and turned it over. Happy birthday, Bo. From Lily. Disappointment sat like lead in her stomach. Could belong to anyone. We might as well do a door-to-door. That street's the closest logical place for a vehicle to have waited. Yeah, the woods would have provided coverage. Gut clenching with a furious mix of worry and anger, she put the bracelet to the side and grabbed her clothing. Wonder if we can get satellite images. Riley pulled on his jeans and she almost moaned. Focus, Mercy. I'll check, he said, zipping up those damn jeans as she slid on her own. But we might get lucky with an insomniac. When he turned, she saw the marks on his back were almost healed. Fast even for a changeling. Which meant Riley was more powerful than she'd guessed. More than he let on. There was nothing flashy about him. Just, what the? His hands were on her waist and his mouth on hers before she could do more than gasp. Lightning. Bright. Sizzling. Perfect. This time she did moan, wrapping her arms around him and luxuriating in his strength, in the sheer speed with which he'd come at her. With both of them only wearing jeans, her breasts were pressed against the exquisite roughness of the hairs on his chest. She rubbed against him, giving in to the leopard's innate sensuality. He tore away his lips, but they remained less than a millimeter apart. This is your fault. Hell no. She sucked on his neck, biting him a little too hard for emphasis. You jumped my bones. Tugging back her head with a hand fisted in her hair. He glared down at her. You were all but licking me the way you were looking. Looking's not the same as touching. Her mouth watered at the idea of licking him. They'd been in too much of a rush last night. Even the second and third time. As if they'd both been hungry so long, they'd needed to gorge. But, we don't have time for this. He held her for another couple of seconds, pure male muscle and heated skin. We need to make time. It was an order. The cat hissed. The woman narrowed her eyes. What you need to do is let go of me before I give you some scars that won't heal over as quick. One big hand skated down her back to tease the top edge of her jeans. I bet if I touched you now, I'd find you silky and hot and damp. Her stomach grew taut as his fingers slid in past the denim. A little rough, all determined. Pushing. He was pushing her. But she was no tabby cat. She was a leopard. Biting those sensuous wolf lips just hard enough to sting. She shoved away using a move that snaked her out of his hold. I meant what I said, Riley. Once was enough. Liar, liar. He didn't attempt to grab her again, watching her dress with eyes gone amber as he finished pulling on his own clothes. That's not what your body says. Yeah, well, it's not the best judge of character. Ignoring the weight of his gaze, she scraped her hair into a tight ponytail, having finally remembered stuffing a thick rubber band into her jeans as she left work a couple of days earlier. I've got no room in my life for a male who's going to tell me what to do. This is just sex. He was trying to make her mad, as if she'd fall for that. Oh, poolies. Snorting, she went to grab her boots. Nothing's just sex with men like you. The instant you take a lover, you become all I man you woman. You do as I say. And no matter how much she wanted a mate, Mercy couldn't submit. Not that way. Not to a man who wanted her to be something different. It would break her. Then you beat your chests and howl at the moon. Riley wasn't amused. You don't think you can handle me? Okay, so maybe he was really good at pushing her buttons. I said I don't have the time. Hopping on one foot, she put on her boot. Fighting the urge to trap her against the tree and bring this conversation down to the basics, Riley fisted his hands. Mercy sucked in a breath at almost the same instant. He froze. What? Nothing. But her teeth were gritted in obvious pain. Looking down at the bare foot she was now holding off the ground, he quickly made the connection. What did you step on? His wolf rose to the surface, protective and more than a little possessive. Nothing. Stubborn cat. He headed over and knelt down in front of her, lifting her foot higher so he could look at the sole. This nothing sure looks like a big fat thorn. It angered him to see her flesh marred by the spike that had already drawn blood. Her hand landed on his shoulder as she balanced herself. I can take care of it. Instead of dropping her foot, he held on tighter. Have you had your shots? He asked, knowing she'd hate any kind of sympathy. Mercy was as proud as they came, and for some reason it was important to him that that pride never be crushed. I don't want to catch rabies. Ha, she muttered, but her voice was strained. Since you won't let go, can you get it out? He checked the ground to make sure there were no other dangers. Mercy's opinions on the matter notwithstanding, he was a protector. Taking care of the woman he was rapidly coming to consider his own was as natural to him as breathing. It'll be easier if you sit. He didn't offer to help her down, just watched to make sure she didn't hurt herself anymore. Once she had her back to the trunk, he put her foot on his lap and grimaced. It won't be pretty. I think your skin started to heal around it. That was the problem with changelings, they healed quickly, especially when it came to minor flesh wounds. But if this healed over, the thorn would remain embedded in her heel. Do it. She set her jaw, shifting so his back was to her. He pressed the flesh on either side of the thorn with enough force to send it through the surface. He heard Mercy suck in another breath, knew she was hurting. The damn thorn had barbs. His wolf swept over his skin, hackles raised. Every male instinct in him wanted to give comfort, but he knew Mercy would hate that with a capital H. You know, he said, fighting to keep his tone even, I think I see a family resemblance. Maybe that's why it was drawn to you. You think you're hilarious, don't you? It was a little breathless. Another hard press got the thorn most of the way out. Say ah. One final application of pressure and the ugly thing was out. He made sure to crush it using a claw before dropping it to the ground. Mercy didn't say a word as he checked the already healing wound. He was fast about it but thorough. I don't think it left any traces. Get Tammy to have a look anyway. It'll be fully healed in another hour. He shot her a narrow-eyed look, noting her strained expression. Do you want me to report you to your healer? She glared daggers at him, color rapidly returning. I want you to let go of my foot. He kept hold, gently massaging the area around the wound, ensuring good blood flow. It would help her heal even faster. Will you see Tammy? Yes. Fine. Can we go now? In a second. He checked the wound again. It'll be a bit tender to walk on until it heals. Be careful. It looked like she was going to snap something at him, but she clamped her mouth shut and put on her remaining sock and boot. Standing, she tested the foot. It's fine. The sucker just hurt like hell while it was in there. Riley nodded, but kept his eye on her balance. It was good. His wolf retreated. Let's head in. Grabbing the identity bracelet, he slid it into a pocket. Mercy folded her arms. Thanks. It was a grumpy acknowledgement. So gracious. As she closed her eyes as if to count to 10, he felt the wolf rise again, this time with pure mischief as its aim. You never answered my question. What? Whether you're running from us because you don't think you can handle me. I did answer it. I said I didn't have time. Chicken. Said as they came within hearing distance of the men and women guarding the house. Mercy's mouth fell open. Surely she'd heard wrong. Surely solid stayed stick in the mud. Riley Aiden Kincaid had not dared her by calling her a chicken. What did you say? You heard. He greeted the 4 others who joined Monroe and Owen. 2 of them were wolves. Monroe walked over. I saw nothing under the house that could have been used to pipe gas into the home, but I'll make sure the techs recheck, he told them. Thing is, Owen does some sharpshooting. He says if you were good enough, you might be able to get some sort of gas pellet through the little vent in the bathroom. That vent is tiny, Mercy muttered. Riley made a sound of disagreement. I know 2 men who could do it. Dorian and Judd. Nodding, she glanced at Monroe. Tell the techs to pay extra attention to that area when they arrive. Raising her voice, she held up a hand. Owen and Monroe, stay on the house. Rest of you with us. Mercy hit pay dirt barely 5 minutes into the search. She knocked on the door of a small cottage with frilly curtains and a garden so neat that no weed would dare show its head, and found herself being scrutinized by a tiny woman with such strength of will in her that it fairly pulsed in the air. Bright brown eyes looked Mercy up and down. So, you tumbled that wolf you were with? Mercy was too much a pack animal to take offense at the personal question. She grinned. How did you know it was me? Do I look senile to you? Not waiting for a response, she continued. I was coming out to you, but you took off too fast. Every sentinel instinct came on alert. You saw something? For an answer, the woman picked up a piece of paper from a table beside the door and shoved it at Mercy. Registration number of the van that was parked here for much too long. I knew they were up to mischief. Did you call enforcement? Course I did. A pause. Got a nephew in there. Good kid. He says it was off a stolen vehicle. But I wrote down the description of the van too. Mercy was already pulling out her cell to get the Dark River techs onto surveillance. So, her informant prompted before she could code in the call. Yes, Mercy said. And I'm not doing it again. If she kept telling herself that, maybe her traitorous body would actually notice and shut up with its demands. The older woman gave her a sour look. Damn shame. What, you like them prettier? A snort. In my day we liked men who looked like men. Mercy had no chance to reply, finding the door shut in her face. Everyone was a critic today. And coming on top of Riley's chicken taunt, it didn't put her in the best of moods. But the tech answered then and she gave him the info. He promised to get back to her the second they had anything. Riley was waiting for her by the curb, explaining how the old lady knew what he looked like. Get anything? The woman's words in her mind. She ran her eyes over him as she shared the intel. He definitely looked like a man she thought all hard and solid and rough. Strength, there was incredible strength in Riley, which made the gentleness of his hold as he'd gotten that thorn out of her foot all the more extraordinary. She knew what he'd been up to with those cracks of his. Damn Wolf had been looking after her, and he'd done it right. Even now, the leopard didn't know quite what to make of it, so she concentrated on the hunt. It's a good lead. There's something wrong with this, Riley muttered, rubbing at a jaw that already bore the faint shadow of afternoon stubble. That chip tells us this was an elite alliance force, but why would they leave the evidence behind if they're so organized? And being so careless with the van? You thinking the chip could be a plant? He looked down the street, as if seeing what had happened the night before. I had a call from Lucas while you were talking with your informant. Nash's professor says he's being courted by several psi firms. Mercy blinked. Psi are very insular, especially with R&D. Why would they want a changeling? A gifted changeling. Nash is apparently a genius in nanotech. And we both know the council is missing 2 of its top technical scientists. Mercy blew out a breath between her teeth. The implant protocol crashed and burned with Ashiya's broadcasts. That protocol had been meant to turn the individuals of the Psi-net into a true hive mind, interconnected and seamless. Yeah, but what if someone's got the idea to keep it on the back burner for the future? He shrugged. It's a theory. But if you're right, either the Psi took Nash and pinned the blame on the Human Alliance or the Alliance took him and did a sloppy job. Mercy rubbed her forehead. Or we could be screwing ourselves up by making this too complicated. I guess we'll find out when we find Nash. She jerked up her head, hearing a very dangerous threat in his voice. Hey, cut that out. We're in a human neighborhood. The eyes that looked at her weren't brown anymore. And this is wolf territory. Leopard and wolf. She refused to back down under that predatory gaze, though it chilled her to the soul. She'd never seen Riley lose it like that. And so rapidly. What flipped your lid? If Nash is hurt, Willow's going to blame herself for not being able to help her brother. Oh. He won't be. He's a predatory changeling. We're not easy to kill. She made her voice as arrogant as she could. Now pull yourself out of that slobbering mess of self-pity and get with the program. This isn't about you. Riley stared at her with those cold wolf eyes, a rich amber that held pure menace. One day, he said calmly, your mouth is going to get you into more trouble than you can handle.